So first of all, I'd really like to thank Mark. Thank you, Mark, for giving me the opportunity to talk to you guys today. And I guess part of what I want to refer to is a mixture of my journey, but also I really want to talk, and it's really more at the end, about public engagement, because I think what you guys represent as the new generation of whether you're a scientist or an academic, but overall, the new wave generation of individuals. It's, I think, quite important that we engage with the public. And so often we can be viewed as being isolated or from an ivory tower. And I'll just describe how I stumbled my way into, particularly with COVID and the impact that COVID had personally on me and also in London. So, but what I thought I'd talk a bit about is a bit about immunology. So the key thing about the immune system, and I realize I'm talking to a diverse audience, so I've got a couple of data slides, but not too many, because I realize it's a, you know, it's a Tuesday evening. I must make sure I've got my timer on. So primarily what I want to talk about is what happens as we get older. And as I look across the room, I realize there's beautiful, handsome young people. So I'm in part jealous. But really what I want to remind you all is that the immune system is incredibly important, not just from the newborn, but throughout life. And what I'll show you is the impact of what happens as our immune system gets weaker, which sadly sort of coincides with aging. And that's one of the questions I really want to pose to this amazing group of talented people in terms of solving that problem. And this problem has come about because what people have started to recognize is there are a large amount of age-associated chronic diseases. So what you see, for example, with increasing age, there's diabetes, osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, various autoimmune disease. And what appears to underline all of these areas is something associated with one's immune system. This can also be seen with flu. Here's a study taken in Holland just over 10 years ago, where they just looked at the rate of mortality and morbidity amongst those that obtain flu. And sadly, as you can see, the impact of flu was clearly associated with folks from an older age. And then when we look more closely at the situation only a few years ago with the pandemic, you could see that sadly age was a risk factor. As you can see here, and this is data from Age UK, and including also the Office for National Statistic data that you can readily get, is that you find that again, that the impact of COVID was sadly reflected with age. And so what this has led folks, and this is a publication we did with a number of other immunologists, is the idea of this term immune senescence. And immune senescence has been regarded as, and defined as somehow there's a deterioration of immune function with age. I should point out it's not completely lost, and that's really important. Basically, it's the ability to make an immune response is not as robust as it is in younger individuals. So I really want to make the case, it's what happens is that you see an increase in susceptibility to disease, you see it to cancer, but also response to vaccination is somewhat poor. And so what you see in terms of this age-associated decline in immune function is you see this reduced ability to fight infections, as you see with flu or as you see with COVID. What you also see is this increase associated with inflammatory disorder. And there's a phrase that they're now starting to use, it's called inflammaging, where if you take older folks and you can actually just measure the amount of these pro-inflammatory cytokines, you find that with increasing age, the level of this pro-inflammatory cytokine is present. And it's the impact of having a large amount of these pro-inflammatory mediators that is also influencing chronic diseases. And then what you see is this poor response to vaccination. And so immunologists and others have been trying to identify what are the possible mechanisms. And they fall into two camps. One of them is maybe there's something inside the cell itself. There's something about the cell that it's not being able to perform, adequately. Others think, actually, no, it's the environment that the cells are in, the so-called nature versus nurture. And it's that environment, for example, because there's an increase of these pro-inflammatory mediators. So when a cell is being developed in a normal young environment, it can prosper. But then in an inflamed environment, that cell clearly can't be able to function and do its job properly. And so immunologists have been trying to understand which one of these, or is it both, that are involved in this aging process of a decline in immune function. So let me just give you just a brief taste of what people have found, including myself and others. And I just want to take you to a story of how cells are made. So the majority of cells in our body are made in the bone marrow. The bone marrow is a site, it's called hematopoiesis, for those that are interested. It's where blood-borne cells are made. They're called primary lymphoid organ. But there's another group of white cells called T cells. And T cells are made in an organ called the thymus, as it's situated there. And the thymus is situated above the heart. So primary lymphoid organs, think of them as like the university of development of your white blood cells. So they start off as primary, but then they graduate as fully competent cells, okay? Whereas the secondary lymphoid organs, think of them as the places where you work. Secondary lymphoid organs, like the spleen, like other lymph nodes that are around our body, is where immune cells become activated. And so what people have been trying to understand is, given the fact that immune cells are made in one organ and activation occurs in another, let's try and look at these two organs to see, are there changes with age? And primarily this is what people have been doing, just taking these organs and just simply saying, this is what it looks like in young, this is what it looks like in older individuals. And these differences, what does it say? So I'll just talk to you primarily a bit about the first organ, which I've spent quite a lot of time on because I've developed quite an interest. And this is the thymus. So this is like the university for T cells. So before you become a T cell, you've got to enter the T cell university, okay? And the weird thing about this organ, which is situated above the heart, so stem cells from the bone marrow migrate into the thymus where they become educated to become fully competent T cells. But something remarkably happens as you get older. The thymus becomes smaller. It's known as age-associated thymic involution. The remarkable thing about this process, that this organ becomes smaller and smaller, seems to be universal. And what I mean by that, I mean almost any organ that has a thymi, as this university for T cells, seems to display this decreasing cellularity. So this is a study we did several years ago where we just took mice. So we just went around various biological service units, grabbed as much mice as we could, and when someone was using them for a different study, we took the thymi and we literally just counted the number of cells that's present in that organ. And what you see, and others have shown, is that you see that the size declines with age. Now, unfortunately, you can't do that to a lot of other animals. So people have been developing a process to understand how this organ sort of shrinks with age. Remember, the role of the thymus is to graduate as many T cells as possible. So you may not, I don't realize it's, quite late in the evening, but I just want to show you, this is a technical slide, but the take-home message is that even in humans, this is a study that's done in humans several years ago, is that even in humans, you can measure this thymic activity. Okay, how many T cells are graduating from the thymus? And what you see is that the level of T cell graduation in humans decline with age. So even the human thymus shows a reduced activity with age. We've also, and that's one of the great things being at the vet college, and I must stress I'm not a vet, so don't ask me any questions about your cat or your dog, because I don't know. But even in dogs, and I was able to do this study with Professor Brian Catchpole. So we used a PCR technique, and I want to stress no dogs were sacrificed for this study. Okay, I have to put that disclaimer because I know it's important. And so several years ago, what we showed that even in dogs, as the dogs get older, you find that thymic involution also occurs. And even if you take the most primitive organism that has a thymus, and that's the zebrafish, you find that the zebrafish thymus declines with age. So this decline of the thymus is evolutionary conserved. We have no idea why. And so what you see is this feature of this aging thymus. This organ, this university is such that it's vibrant, it's got the scaffolding, it's got the microenvironment. And imagine it as a university. Students come in, they get inspired by the academic staff and the wonderful building as this college is, and they come out as extremely confident graduates. Sadly, in an aging thymus, the building is crumbling. There are no academic staff, or there are very few of them. So unfortunately, there's hardly any students coming in because they don't want to go there, and the graduates that are there aren't actually getting the real robust education. And so what you see, the consequence of that is that the number of T cells are reducing, it's completely disorganized, and more importantly, T cell output is significantly reduced. So people were then thinking, well, hold on a moment. If we are losing T cells, surely this is going to have a problem in terms of immune fitness. However, the human body, or indeed most immune cells, have actually come up with a problem. They've actually solved this. So what appears to happen is that in the periphery, in circulation, despite the reduction of these new graduate T cells, the remaining T cells recognize this and actually start to expand to occupy that space. So your T cell numbers in blood doesn't actually change. But certain things do, as can illustrated here. What you see is the number of graduates are reduced, but that is then taken over by what we call memory cells. But the take-home message, and I realize this is a complicated slide, but the take-home message that I really want you to think about is diversity. The immune diversity is really reduced, and diversity is really important. Given the many antigens that an individual will face in their lifetime, it's really important to have a diverse pool of immune cells, and we're just looking here at T cells. So what happens is the fact that this diversity causes a huge problem. And primarily, when a new virus comes along, like COVID, that's when you see the impact of having a reduced repertoire. And that's also seen in dogs. So that's what I want to talk about in terms of a primary lymphoid organ. If we now take a secondary lymphoid organ, so when T cells come into an organ and when they're actually doing their work, what does that environment looks like? And one other take-home message, I'm talking about T cells, but there are other immune cells in the body that also undergo age-related changes, and I'm more than happy to talk about them. So if we take the secondary lymphoid organ, this is what a spleen looks like. And primarily think of a spleen as where you've got your white cells, and these white cells are incredibly organized. What's quite interesting with lymphoid organs, they're not just randomly placed. You find that T cells are in one area, B cells are in another area. You have another cell called macrophages that are involved in presenting antigens to the immune system. What may look like complete chaos is incredibly well organized. And if you disrupt that organization, immune response actually deteriorates. It's been studied, and there are some mutants that demonstrate that. So if the cells are in the wrong place, they can't make an immune response. And so, not surprisingly, what you see, and we've done some histology, where we've literally just taken spleen from mice at different ages and just say, where are those T cells and B cells? And what you see in a young mouse is that they're really well organized in various zones. But then, as animals get older, you can see that they're all over the place. They're completely disorganized. One of the other things you'll see in an aging spleen, and indeed in lymph nodes, is the increasing fibrosis. This is associated with this pro-inflammatory cytokine that appears with age. So one of the hallmarks of these pro-inflammatory cytokine is increased fibrosis. So what you see in a spleen is you see more fibrosis. So T cells and B cells can't traffic and meet each other because of this complete disorganization that occurs. So what you see is that in a young spleen, you see it's well organized. T and B cells can meet in order to make a robust immune response. But because of the disorganization that occurs with age, you can't actually, the cells can't meet and they can't make a robust immune response. So let me just summarize this part of the talk, which I just wanted to describe what happens as the immune system declines with age. So you see this microenvironment. The university for T cells is disorganized. And so what I'm proposing is that, yes, there may be something inside the cell, intrinsic, but extrinsically is also contributing. And here's an interesting fact, where people have targeted the microenvironment in old mice, they're able to rejuvenate the thymus. And that's really interesting. And what's really clear, and we have no idea, one of the questions I'd like to propose to this amazing group of intelligent people is that somehow this process of the thymus becoming smaller is evolutionarily conserved, suggesting there must be a common pathway, but we have no idea why. Why should an organ that makes an important immune cell show a size reduction with age? Why? What is the evolutionary advantage of this? And that's something we have no idea. And one of the things that might be interesting might be linked to lifespan. So there's some recent study shows that age-associated thymic involution is different between men and women. It's slightly less reduced in women than men, and maybe that's the reason for the difference in lifespan. A bit of hand waving there, but there is some interesting data people are starting to look at. And then the idea that these secondary lymphoid organs, where these cells are working, it appears that the microenvironment is also associated with this decline with immune function. And so is it worthwhile targeting the microenvironment in terms of boosting the aged immune system? And that's my second question that I've posed to you. So while I've been doing all this sort of research, an important part, and something Mark mentioned, is that I've come from an atypical route of education. I don't have any A levels or the equivalent. I ended up doing what's called a BTEC. I don't even have any O levels either. I ended up doing CSCs. So I actually have very little education, and some people still think that. So one of the things I've been really passionate about is the fact that I was given an opportunity, as Mark says, by Sir Robert Leckler and Professor Elizabeth Simpson, who saw something in me. And so one of the things I'm really passionate about is not just about public engagement, but also giving that opportunity. So I'm a descendant from the Windrush generation. My parents came here in the 50s from the Caribbean, and I grew up and born in South London. And so coming and allowing Robert and Liz to give me that opportunity, I really felt was important to give back. And that's something that I've been passionately and doing. And so there's pictures of events where I've been to the Cheltenham Festival. I've got to mention one story. Richard Hale School in Hertfordshire. So I know this building is named after Reuben College. So one of the things Richard Hale School wants to do, they want to inspire their students in terms of getting them to do more science, because that's one of the things I'm passionate about. So they decided, well, what we're going to do, we're going to name our class different scientists. And so they decided, well, we could name them Faraday or, Newton. And then the teacher goes, no, why don't we be more modern and give them sort of contemporary scientists? So there's Richard Hale School, and I don't know if you can see this, but they decided to name the different streams of their science class, their GCSE class, after famous scientists. And there is a Palmer stream. I don't know what group they're in, but there is a Palmer stream. There's also a Sarah Gilbert stream, and a few other streams. And they've invited all of us in to actually talk to young people, which I think is a really smart move to encourage more people to get into science. Then I'm involved in Amos Bursary, and the word Amos should mean a lot to you based in Oxford, because Baroness Valerie Amos is the master of university in Oxford. And so she set up a charity along with her sister called Amos Bursary, where they were asking people to support and mentor young people from diverse backgrounds to highlight the importance of university education. This is a young man called Tyrese, who is incredibly smart and now earns more money than me. He's in a biotech in Boston, USA. I really made a mistake. And also, the last one I really want to point out is I was involved in a school visit in South London, an old primary school that I used to visit, Ashmore Primary School. I was made their star pupil of the week, so that was fantastic. And I think it's really important to try and make a difference, and I think you all can make a difference. And so one of the things a couple of years ago that I got an email from was the Royal Society. The Royal Society said we need to try and do more to inspire folks from diverse backgrounds, from diverse communities, because they represent a significant proportion of the population that we need to encourage to get into science. So they set up a system called Inspiring Scientists, Diversity in British Science, where they managed to get about a dozen of us from different aspects of science. We were told to write our life story, and what they've subsequently done is to make YouTube clips, is also to make them into short clips they can send to schools and distribute them, and then that's one of the reasons why I've managed to visit schools. And then there's the Intellectual Property Office, part of the civil service. As this month is Black History Month, a couple of years ago, they asked if I could be the face of Black History Month. Again, the idea to encourage and inspire more people to get into science. And that's what I've been passionately doing. And then 5 years ago, COVID happened. And moreover, what really got me into this area in terms of my public engagement was this story. So I live in Brent. Brent is one of the most diverse boroughs in London. I live in Wembley. And so at around in sort of the middle of 2020, Norfolk Park was one of the first hospitals that went under emergency measures. Okay, that's where I did my PhD. That's where both my daughters were born. I literally live a stone throw away from there. Not only that, on the street in Brent, called Church Road, over 40 people died in one household. In a street, over 40 people died. I know that street well. I get my hair cut. I know it's hard to believe, but I get my hair cut down that street. So, but here's the dilemma, and perhaps some of you are aware of this. So imagine this. Norfolk Park is in Brent. It serves a massive diverse community. It's the first hospital that goes under emergency measures of COVID. There's people on the high streets that are dying. So here's the dilemma. COVID shows a disparity in terms of diverse community. And there are some reasons for this, which we'll discuss. But the irony of it all, these are the same groups that had the lowest uptake of the vaccine. Remarkable. So what is the reasons behind this? And here are some of the reasons, maybe associated with social deprivation, the social inequalities. Despite Brent being a fantastic place to live, a brilliant borough, it does unfortunately have aspects of social inequality and economic deprivation. The majority of people that were working or in employment in Brent are ones they have to do public-facing activities. But like I said before, despite this massive impact of COVID in Brent and in other parts of London, vaccination was the complete opposite. So what you notice is the groups that were massively impacted by COVID were the least likely to take the vaccine. A report came out during that time by Professor Kevin Fenton, whereby he wrote a fantastic report beyond understanding of the data to try and understand some of this areas. And so what was happening was I was getting calls from family and friends about COVID. Donald, you're an immunologist. Tell me what's going on. Um, we're going to take the vaccine, but we don't really trust it. So there's this massive vacuum. And so myself and Winston, Professor Winston Morgan, who's based at University of East London, decided to take it on ourselves to run focus groups. I've never run a focus group in my life, but I decided to try and understand what the issues were and why they weren't actually taking the vaccine. So I went into a number of community churches and faith leaders and spoke with them and just simply asked them, you know, what is and what can we do? And here are some important things. It's not so much they were hesitant, but it's more a case they just lack the information. The majority of those folks don't listen to Radio 4 or get The Guardian or get broadsheets. So all of a sudden, they've distrust with authority and with society. And next minute, they're asked to take the vaccine. And so what we realized, you know, soon after, again in around 2020, was the need to have some form of community engagement. And so what we did was we just did loads of webinars and loads of visits. And what's interesting is the impact of working with faith groups and faith leaders. And the other important thing was the idea of when engaging with the community is to really take legitimacy their concerns. Their concerns are legitimate. And it's more importantly to listen to them. But one of the things I found was you can't just do one hit and leave. I remember we were doing debates that went on for hours and just asking questions. And then the following day, meet with the same group. I don't think the NHS would sponsor any of this because it would cost money. But Winston and I and many others actually did all these events for free. Okay, I really want to make the case. So why is this important? And we need to do more research into this area. So for my sins, I'm also chair of governors of a school in Brent. I don't know why I do this. And so I normally meet with the sort of medical officer for Brent. And here's the worrying statistics, is that there are now cases of measles in London. It's the same group that unfortunately were showing hesitancy with COVID. It's now unfortunately the hesitancy and the judgment is now affecting other vaccines. And this is a really important what we need to try and sort of really look at and really conquer. You know, this impact is really now for real. And so let me conclude, and then I'm going to just give you a couple of points about the solution. There's no point complaining and then not having solutions. So in summarizing this part, it's quite clear COVID-19 really highlights society's inequalities. And so what's really important is to address those inequalities. Forget the vaccine for a moment. What COVID has done is realize, unfortunately, not everything is equal. And so in order to gain trust from the folks that require vaccination, there's got to be a case where they feel they have a stake in society. And that's really important. And it's partly related to, unfortunately, their experience with not just the health profession, but with people in authority, whether that be the police, whether that be health, whether that be education. There's one of those members in their family where they've had not a really great experience with one of those people in authority. So it's really important to regain that trust. Equally, what's important, and there's been very little studies done on this, is to try and work out what methods work. As I said before, they're not vaccine hesitancy, they're not anti-vaxxers. They just really want some information so they can make an informed decision. But it has to be done in an appropriate and respectful manner. So bearing that in mind, and we're trying to get some funding to do this, by the way, but bearing that in mind, I'll give you some examples of solutions. And one of the solutions is this, where I was approached by NHS England, and because I was complaining about this, they said, okay, do something. So I sent over a small script to say, why don't you use this as a promotional campaign? And I'm not even going to put it on because I then got conned. So I sent them the script and I said, do it about football because I like football. And so the script is a bit about football. and it's literally 2 minutes. But then afterwards they said, well, why don't you narrate it? And then I narrated it, and it's, yeah, I hate it. It's doing well apparently, but I have the most respect for Tom Hanks. I have most respect because one of the things I realized, this is only a 2 minute narration that I've done, but it took me a whole day. I was going to swear then, but it took me a whole day because when I was recording it, the sound engineer goes, I didn't realize this, but at the end when you speak, your voice declines slightly. And the engineer goes, no, you got to do that again. So I actually did it backwards, which is the most painful thing to experience. But it's on YouTube and it's doing the rounds. And one of the things that I've done deliberately, I actually don't mention COVID. From the focus groups and the discussion, I literally talk about the importance of vaccination and the importance of boosting your immune system. I really try to downplay it, recognizing what can work. But also, one of the things that came about in the discussion was the fact is that there needs to be greater representation. And so what are organizations doing? And I want to give a real shout out to Mark's former university, University of York, because one of this fantastic campaign they're doing is called Y-Seed. 5 universities in Yorkshire, that's Leeds, Sheffield Hallam, York and Bradford, have combined together to see if they can increase the number of postdoctoral scientists from diverse backgrounds. I'm on one of the advisory boards, and I gave a talk at Bradford, which is my alma mater. And while they're encouraging more folks from diverse communities to do postgraduate studies, etc., I went there to try and encourage them more into STEM. And then lastly, a project that I'm really grateful to be involved with, and really thank you to Mark, is this legacy. And there's something Mark and I spoke about, and this is really remarkable, in that basically this project involving immunizing individuals and just tracking their cells. What's remarkable about this study is that there's been a whole host of studies looking and tracking the immune system, but no one's actually asked the question, why don't we do it in folks from diverse communities? I think it's one of the few studies that's doing this. Remarkable, isn't it? It's 2024. So it's really important. And I'll just briefly give you a background of what this study involves, because I think this is absolutely fantastic, and really grateful for Mark to ask me to get involved. And it's basically immunizing individuals. A number of people, such as Mark, Katrina Pollock, and many others are involved, primarily based at Oxford. So I just jumped in on the bandwagon. So these are the various studies they're doing. They're basically vaccinating and just looking at the white blood cells. The data is amazing. But for me, this is the best part, is look at that team. Look at the people that are involved in this study. It's incredibly diverse. And we talk about team science. And for me, this is really amazing. Diverse backgrounds, age, etc. And I think this is really where the future is. And finally, I'd like to leave on engaging with the public. And I mentioned about going to Cheltenham Science Festival, etc., etc. What I urge and encourage you all is to think of going to events that are perhaps atypical, because everyone has a genuine interest, I believe, in science. And I'll leave with this slide, because this slide's really funny. Actually, I've got acknowledgement, but this is the slide I want to leave you with. So this is the Lambeth County Show. This is an event whereby it's mostly to do with a music festival, etc., in South London, in Lambeth. And they have a discovery tent where there's people talking about science. And the Legacy Group, Mark and Katrina and myself, were there. And as you can see, we're engaging with the public, talking to them about science. It's a completely different crowd to those from Cheltenham, but they equally have an interest, because this is the group of young people in particular we need to encourage to be the next generation of future scientists. So I'm going to leave it there. This is the acknowledgement of those that are involved in the science part, and I'm really grateful for people to give me animals, mice, etc., etc. And then this is the acknowledgement of the guys that are involved in doing the public engagement. And there's a picture of me and others we went to a community group, and we're simply just asking folks about what they feel about being vaccinated. You know what's interesting is that some of them said it's the first time somebody asked me about this. So I'll leave it there.